Good morning. These are the notes for our second to last chapter, the urinary system. Why do we have a urinary system? Its main function is to eliminate waste products. Main waste products are nitrogenous wastes, toxins, and drugs. So your body creates nitrogenous wastes naturally through its functions. Toxins, you get bit by a spider, you get bit by a snake, you accidentally get food poisoning, you eat a poison mushroom. All these different things would be toxins. Your body would want to get rid of them. And drugs. If you, not so much alcohol, that's taken care of in the liver, but if you take other drugs, which you should not, but if you did, such as nicotine in the body, or if you take too much aspirin, or too much Tylenol, or too much ibuprofen, stuff that your body can't absorb, it's going to get rid of in the urine. That's why a lot of times for a drug test, they tell you, all right, we're going to give you a urine test. Why? Because if the drugs are present, they're going to be kicked out of your body through your urine. It can also regulate homeostasis, depending on what it pulls out to get rid of, or what it doesn't pull out to get rid of, or what it puts back in the body to keep. Can help balance water balance, electrolytes, acid base, blood pressure, red blood cell production, activation of vitamin D, all these different things based on what it decides to filter out and what it decides to not filter out. 4 different parts of the urinary system. We're only going to focus on one today. The 4 different parts are kidneys, where the filtration happens. Ureters takes what's been filtered out down to the bladder, which then, when it fills up, squeezes and kicks things out of the body through the urethra. So here we have kidneys, the brown kidney bean looking things, which is why they're called kidney beans. Then you have the yellow tubes, those are the ureters, down to the stripy bladder at the bottom, and then the urethra. Here's about where they are on a person. Bottom of the thoracic, top of the lumbar. It's against the dorsal body wall on your back. So if you hold your urine for a while, you'll probably start to get side and back pain. That's your ureters and your kidneys having problems because your bladder is full and you're not releasing it, and some of the systems are starting to back up and complaining because they're not supposed to work like that. At the level of the T12 to L3 vertebrae, bottom of the thoracic, top of the lumbar. Right kidney is slightly lower than the left due to the position of the liver. You'll notice they're not exactly level. The right kidney is slightly lower than the left. Renal features, you have the renal hilum, which is the indentation where a lot of things connect to it. Ureters, blood vessels, nerves. And an adrenal gland sits on top of the kidney. Ad means above, and renal is kidney. So it is the gland that is the above kidney gland. Here you can see the hilum, where you have the blood vessels and the ureters, and if we showed nerves, you'd have nerves poking in there as well. And also the adrenal gland, this sort of styrofoam-looking thing on top of the kidneys. Regions of the kidneys. 3 major regions: cortex, medulla, and pelvis. The outer region is the cortex, all these little tiny blood vessels that you have here along the outside is the cortex. Then you get the medulla, the inside, where you get your pyramids and you get your columns, which we'll talk about in a second. And then you have your calyces, your calyx, collecting these ducts into the pelvis, which is this light brown colored area in the center that then collects and sends to the ureter. Structures, we already talked about calyces when we talked about the pelvis, because they're the cup-shaped things that funnel them towards the pelvis. We already talked about the columns, too, which are cortex-like material that separate the pyramids. And finally, the renal pyramids, the important stuff. Triangular regions of tissue in the medulla. Helps more with filtering and with other functions. Here you can see your renal pyramid looking like little pieces of raw meat just sitting there. Here you have the cortex on the outside, which you can see a lot of the little tiny blood vessels on the outside. Pieces of raw meat are the pyramids. Then you have the columns in between where you have a little bit larger blood vessels. Then you have your calyces, little cups, especially at the bottom of the pyramids, that lead to the pelvis, which is this collection of white material on the inside that then also has yellow to differentiate it from blood vessels. 1/4 of your total blood supply passes through the kidneys each minute. And we don't have time to really focus on the blood vessels themselves, because, unfortunately, we don't have time. Let's talk about nephrons. These are the structural and functional units of the kidneys. These are what filter out stuff in your blood and form the urine. Two major structures, the glomerulus and the renal tubule. Glomerulus is where we start the filtration. Renal tubule is where we continue it into what do we kick out and absorb back into the body, and what does the body then secrete into the tubules that didn't get pulled out before. We will talk about all this stuff later. Glomerulus, it's a knot of capillaries. Looks kind of like a clove of garlic. Capillaries are covered in podocytes from the renal tubule, and it sits within the Bowman's capsule. It has podocytes, which have filtration slits and foot processes that stick to it. Allows for a lot of filtration. So you have your efferent arteriole and afferent arteriole, and they mix a lot in this capsule. Allows for a lot of filtration of stuff in the blood. Here's an actual picture of one of these podocytes and foot processes, and you can see the filtration slits that things filter through. Next, you have nephron anatomy. 4 different parts to the nephron. You have the capsule, proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, and distal convoluted tubule. PCT for proximal, DCT for distal. And this extends from the capsule and ends at the collecting duct. And it is a very long tube that allows for more filtration. As you can see, you have your little garlic thing here in the center, the Bowman's capsule, but then you have this really long convoluted tube that you have a bunch of capillaries wrapping around and continuing filtration till it ends on the left side at the collecting duct. 2 different types of nephrons. You have your cortical and your juxtamedullary. Cortical is entirely within the cortex. Most of your nephrons are like this. Not gigantic, not stretched out, but some of them do stretch out, and when you get to this loop of Henle at the bottom, it extends all the way down into the medulla. So let's go back up and look here. So we have our little garlic tubule here. As it stretches up, that is the proximal convoluted tubule. And then once it starts dropping down, it eventually leads to this little thin area. That is the loop of Henle. Once it thickens back up as it comes up, we are in the distal convoluted tubule. And it wraps around and ends in the collecting duct. So, if that loop of Henle stays within the cortex, you get these cortical nephrons. The entire thing is entirely contained within the cortex. But if your loop of Henle drops all the way down into the medulla, past this red and blue line, that is a juxtamedullary nephron. You have a few of those, but most of your nephrons are these small cortical types. Collecting duct receives urines from many nephrons, many distal convoluted tubules. Runs then through the medullary pyramids, where you can collect all the stuff from the ducts, and then those can deliver urine into the calyces and renal pelvis. Nephrons are associated with two different capillary beds, but we don't have time to go into depth with them, unfortunately. We're going to focus on how do we form urine here. 3 different parts. Filtration in the glomerulus, in the Bowman's capsule. Then you have tubular reabsorption and tubular secretion. So first off, filtration in the glomerulus, in the Bowman's capsule. It's a non-selective process. Small things are forced through, such as water and things smaller than proteins, which are just amino acid chains folded over to make a certain shape. Things that are protein size and bigger, such as blood cells, other cells, those are normally too large to pass through the filtration membrane, which is good. It means you don't have to replace your blood every time it goes through the kidneys. Filtrate is then collected in the capsule and leaves via the renal tubule. The peritubular capillaries reabsorb useful things, things that are small and got pushed through, such as water. That goes through. You probably want water in your body. Glucose. Glucose is smaller than probably about every single protein in your body. Amino acids, obviously, if proteins are made of amino acids are smaller than proteins and get pushed through. And then ions, no bigger than a couple atoms. Of course, those are going to be smaller than your proteins. Some reabsorption is passive. Most of it is active. About the only thing you get passively is water, and at one point you do get a little bit of salt, passive reabsorption. But most of it is active because you're going from area of low concentration to area of high concentration because you want that stuff. Most reabsorption also occurs as soon as you leave that glomerulus in the proximal convoluted tubule. Most of it occurs in this giant white rectangle that we have here at the top. You'll see NaCl, which is salt leaving, HCO3, which I believe is a carbonic acid probably, because CO3 would be carbonate, so adding an H, my guess would be some carbonic acid. But I don't know. Water, H2O, glucose and amino acids going out, but you also have some secretion, which we'll talk about in a little bit, which are these green arrows. Drugs and poisons going in. Hydrogen ions going in. Then you get to the loop of Henle. You get water and salts being pulled out. And then once you get to the distal tubule, you probably don't have a lot of water being pulled out, but you'll have some salt and having potassium ions put in. What do we not reabsorb? Well, obviously, if you're making this urea and uric acid, you don't want to reabsorb it. You get urea from protein breakdown. So when things break down in your body, you break down proteins, you get urea. You break down the nucleic acids, you get uric acid. If you break down creatine phosphate to remake the ATP, you get used up creatine. You then get creatinine, which is put in your urea and excreted out. Reabsorption in reverse is secretion. What does your body put into the tubules? Some materials move from the blood into the tubules, such as hydrogen and potassium ions and creatinine. Process is important for getting rid of substances not already in the filtrate. Creatinine is bigger than your proteins, so it's not filtered out, but you still want to get rid of it, so you secrete it into the tubules directly. Materials that are left in the tubule at the collecting duct then get moved toward the ureter. In 24 hours, somewhere between 1 liter and 2 liter of urine is created. Urine and filtrate are different, though. Filtrate, as we're filtering it, contains everything that blood plasma does, everything your blood has, except for the proteins. And one thing that it doesn't mention is it also doesn't contain any of the stuff that is not directly your plasma, such as your red blood cells, your white blood cells, your buffy coat. Urine is what remains after you absorb the water, nutrients, and necessary ions. Urine contains nitrogenous wastes and substances that are not needed. It's yellow due to the presence of urochrome from the destruction of hemoglobin. As we break down blood and red blood cells and you get rid of that hemoglobin, as you break it down, you get this yellow color, urochrome. Hopefully you have enough water in your body to make your urine dilute, so hopefully the yellow color is not very strong and should be a pale yellow straw color. It's unfortunately sterile, which means if you need to get water back in your body, you can drink it. If you are stranded and have no access to water, probably about the first and second time that you pee, you can drink it. After that, you don't really have enough water left in your body that it will be in your urine, and you probably won't get much water out of it anymore. Slightly aromatic, has a distinct smell that hopefully isn't very strong unless you let it just sit and concentrate. Normal pH of slight acidity because it does contain urea and uric acid, which are slightly acidic. So it's normally around a pH of 6. What do we find in it? Sodium, potassium ions, things left over from salts. Urea, uric acid, creatinine, as you break down stuff in your body. Ammonia and bicarbonate ions. If you are a lizard or a bird, you do not have a distinct defecation and urinary tract. So when you go to the bathroom, you combine it. So what we call bird poop and lizard poop and snake poop is actually what would normally be in your digestive tract, plus also this urea, uric acid, and ammonia. The presence of a high amount of ammonia is what turns their poop white. What do we not hopefully find in urine? Hopefully you don't find blood sugar. Hopefully you don't find blood proteins. Hopefully you don't find red blood cells. And hopefully you don't find hemoglobin. Hopefully you also don't find pus or bile. If you do, the protein in the glucose is a little bit less serious, because if you every once in a while find sugar in your pee, it probably means you either ate too much sugar that day or you just had a little flare-up with your diabetes. Proteins. Physical exertion could also be, though, pregnancy. That's why you have to take a pee test for most pregnancy tests. It's trying to look for, do you have these proteins in your urine? If so, that means your body is taking care of something in your uterus, and it's time to let you know that you're positive for pregnancy. Pus. You have pus, white blood cells, and bacteria. It means that bacteria is in your urinary tract and your white blood cells are fighting it, and probably means you got a urinary tract infection. If you have red blood cells, means there's bleeding happening somewhere past those tubules and glomerulus, somewhere in the ureters or bladder or urethra. Hemoglobin could be various reasons, could be you're having a reaction to a blood transfusion you recently got, or could be anemia. And if you have bile, probably liver disease, most likely some sort of hepatitis, which are not all chronic. Some hepatitis you can get and then cure with drugs and treatments. There is our friendly little stop person. Next time we will be talking about your ureters, your bladder, and your urethra. And hopefully that will be the end.